Welcome back to the Horizon TV. I'm Somna Sambo. Well, we are still looking at the attack in Kaduna that killed over 23 people, like we have been told by the Sokapo president. I'm now being joined by Arise Analysts, Barrister Frank Tietie and Professor Abiodun Adeniyi, who will help us to analyze these issues and other stories. I come to you, Professor Abiodun Adeniyi. It looks like there's no more premium for human life in the country. I mean, you see these gunmen or attackers or bandits or terrorists, as they are now known, move into communities in their hundreds, and it looks like there's no security presence. I mean, you could feel the bitterness of the Sokapo president there. What do you make of such kind of attacks?
Well, it's very unfortunate, Subna. It's always very chilling to hear the stories of people who are close to the center of this dastardly act, and you just keep wondering, really, if it has really abated. Over time, we've been talking about questions surrounding security, and obviously it has not really abated. It's just that political stories, have taken the center stage. It's been in the front line, so it appears as if security matters, have been pushed to the background, even though the situation has not really improved. Now we are having a bus stop in Kaduna. The situation is being highlighted again with these unfortunate attacks. But what more can we say other than to continue to insist, that the agencies will have to ramp up their activities, maybe surveillance, reconnaissance, of course we have all the appropriate agencies, the army is there, the police, the DSS and all of that. Is it that they go in once in a while and come out, allowing these bandits, these terrorists, to come to ride roughshod on the citizens, or what really happens? What's actually the case? What would have expected consistency in surveillance, consistency in monitoring and trying to protect the citizenry? Or is it that we don't have enough manpower, or we don't have enough equipment? It's something that has been long-standing, and by now we expect that we'll have placed a hand on it. I'm not going to sympathize with the last speaker, Mr. Jonathan. It's very unfortunate. I sympathize with him, really, but I will not wholeheartedly blame the governor, because how much power does the governor have, even if he's the chief executive? He's not in charge of the army, he's not in charge of the police, he's not in charge of the DSS, even if he has some level of responsibility. But essentially, it lies with the federal government.
But he can request for security.
Yeah, but how much can he request for? And if he requests, how do we know the details? Do not forget that oftentimes we get told that security matters are things, that should always be confidential. The details we do not know, but the only thing that we need to do is to continue to call on the agencies to ramp up their activities, their surveillance, reconnaissance, etc., so that we will not be having this kind of situation frequently.
And I come to you, Barrister Tietie. I mean, this is such a sad development. We are seeing Kaduna State in northwest Nigeria, which has a lot of military institutions. I mean, I don't think there's any other state in Nigeria that has military institutions like Kaduna State. But despite that, these attacks continue to come, and it looks like southern Kaduna has been left to its own. What do you think is the way forward out of these constant attacks?
Let's say it the way it is. There is a gross form of insecurity pervading the entire country. The Nigerian Defense Academy campus has been attacked twice, and senior officers of the training officers at the academy been kidnapped. So it's an intractable situation. Let us acknowledge that. But by now we should be tired of talking about it, because it has been quite rife in the last 3-4 years. A situation of ungoverned space where things just happen, and the governor and other levels of government cannot take responsibility. I think the problem is systemic. It's not necessarily because there will not be criminality. Criminality is festering because the system allows it, the system of irresponsibility on the part of the country's, type of governance, which allows, is a sort of unitary system in terms of providing security for the people. It cannot work. It's staring us in our faces that it has never worked. It could not work in any way. And then we toyed with the issue of state police, community policing, and local government policing, which would have made the business of government being security to be #1 consideration in all of these things. But we still prevaricate about these things. We still play politics about them. So if we want to say localize the issues of Santa Kaduna, it is, I think it's the same in many other parts of the country, even in the Niger Delta. So people have been to Maiduguri and realize that much of the security they enjoy is as a result of concerted efforts by the people themselves. They, deciding.
And a lot of people want to wonder how we can improve community policing. How do we, although we don't have a law right now, but how do communities defend themselves from this kind of attackers? I
think it's the definition of community policing is amorphous. We don't really know what it means, whether it is a form of the kind we saw in terms of JTF, civilian JTF, I mean, where you have vigilante forming themselves and then getting some permission to carry a certain category of ammunition, arms and ammunition. But you see, the concept is that localized policing, to the extent that local authorities, whether at the state or local government level, take responsibility for providing police services. Now, we are a country that is highly under-policed, and then the intelligence gathering, community is extremely poor. Now, the government hasn't come to terms with the fact that its primary responsibility is providing security and not, going around making political statements that seem to whip up sentiments that further exacerbate the security situation as we have it in, especially northern Nigeria, painfully.
Okay, Adeniyi, is it that the federal government is not investing so much in technology? Because if we have drones flying around these communities, I mean, you see chains of attackers coming on bikes. Can't we have some sort of surveillance system that can detect movements, because there's this heat system that can actually, you see a lot of heat, thermal heat, showing that a huge number of persons are moving towards a particular directions, and it should be the onus of the military authorities to know where those people are heading to.
Well, I think it's okay again to reiterate the fact that there are long and short-term measures to dealing with this crisis. The long-term measure is to, first of all, acknowledge what my colleague talked about, the systemic problem. Criminologists will tell you that our system is criminogenic, and because of that, it's reflected in the fact that we are witnessing overpopulation, and overpopulation in the face of limited resources leading to a high level of criminality. And apart from that, there are several stories of the infiltration of the system with small and light weapons that our security agencies often fail to interdict because of large ungoverned deindustrialization around large swaths of land in this northern region. So, of course, we know the problem in the Sahel region, but our problem with our border permitting the inflow of some of these weapons, so it encourages criminality. We're not dealing with that. We need to deal with it. It's very, very fundamental. But that's a long-term view anyway. We have to have it at the back of our mind that something we'll have to deal with. The second one is the short-term one, which we are referring to. How much effort are we investing into equipment? Drones that you are talking about, sophisticated equipment that are sometimes, that can be more sophisticated than the ones that the criminals are using. Do not forget there are stories of some of these criminals bearing arms that are much more effective, much more sophisticated than our own security agents, which is very, very unfortunate, really. So what is the missing link in this circumstance? Should we say that our government or security agencies are failing in some respect? Of course, it might be a difficult call to make, but it's not too far from it. Because over the years, this is not the first time we're hearing these stories of killings.
Yeah, man, it happens every now and then. But it looks like once the attacks don't happen in Abuja, it means those in government don't feel the heat. It's only when it happens in the nation's capital that you see people running around. Just very
I think it's a matter of docility. We've gone to a point where we are overwhelmed as a country, and so reactions are now considered to be something that
at best really maybe matter, tomorrow you see the government sending
the populace is overwhelmed and they are actually traumatized indeed. So they are fallen, it's sad, but you see, let us not forget the overwhelming role of corruption in this matter. You talked about the application of technology as if the monies have not been voted for these equipment. A lot of money, especially with specificity to this drones you mentioned. But we've seen a lot of hundreds of millions of dollars being being stolen by military officers and finance persons in the defense and intelligence community. So that's a big problem. But, you know, we need to get to the point to understand, yes, let us acknowledge too that there are international dimensions to this, to the extent of seeing a destabilization process going on in Nigeria. No doubt about that. But you see, if a government and a people realize that they need to take security into their hands, which is missing, I mean, it's inexplicably missing, that we don't prioritize security above everything else. It ought to be some, these killings, it ought to be unifying factors in terms of shoring up patriotism among us. But we don't see that, you know. Rather, we just throw our arms in the air, hoping that it doesn't get to us. No. I think we are missing as a country, and this is testing the forces, the cohesive forces of this country.
Well, it already seems like this government is not so strong in handling the security the way a lot of Nigerians would have wanted. So the next government would have a lot to chew from next year, and the onus is now on Nigerians to actually ensure that they get the right government that will help to support this outgoing government in ending the issue of security, the issue of insecurity. Well, you're still watching the Arise interview. When we return, we'll be looking at the travels of the Ebonyi State Governor, Dave Umahi. Stay with us. Welcome back to the Arise interview, where we speak to the newsmakers as well as ordinary people doing extraordinary things around the world and featuring the voices at the heart of the conversations. I'm Sumner Sambo, and we'll move on to Ebonyi State now. A federal high court has struck out an application brought by Governor of Ebonyi State, David Umahi, and his deputy, Eric Igwe, seeking to stay execution of the judgment that sacked them from office. Justice Inyang Eko had on the March 8 sacked the governor and his deputy from their offices over their defection from the People's Democratic Party to the All Progressives Congress. The judge held that the 393,042 votes polled by Umahi in the March 2019 governorship polls belong to the PDP and cannot be legally transferred to the APC. Consequently, ECHO ordered the PDP to present another candidate, or in the alternative, the Independent National Electoral Commission should conduct a fresh poll within 90 days. In a motion on notice filed through their team of lawyers, Umahi and Igwe prayed the court to suspend execution of the order. But at the resumed court hearing, the court was informed of the intention by Umahi to withdraw the case. Now, the lawyers of Umahi and Igwe actually asked for this stay of execution to be withdrawn because they filed an appeal at the Court of Appeal. Well, still with me in the studio to take a look at all these issues is Arise News analyst Professor Abiodun Adeniyi, and I also have Frank Tietie, who is a lawyer and Arise News analyst. Gentlemen, I come to you on this very critical aspect, especially you, Tietie. Tell us why the governor would want to withdraw this motion for stay of execution, which is what everybody would naturally want to think, because he appealed the case at the Court of Appeal. Does an appeal at the Court of Appeal stop the judgment from being enforced?
Certainly not. I mean, it's trite law, it's commonplace law that when you bring an appeal to the Court of Appeal, it does not in any way operate as a stay unless an order of stay of execution has been given either by the lower court or the Court of Appeal itself. However, this is one kind of application that can be granted by either of the courts, but the rules of the Court of Appeal are clear, particularly Order 6, stating that you must first go to the lower court that issued that judgment to apply to that lower court to grant the stay of execution. Now, if you look at the political circumstances surrounding the issuance of those orders, Justice Igwe was vilified, maligned by the said Governor Dave Umahi, to the extent that the NBA had to reprimand him and cautioned him. He did offer an apology. So judges are also human beings. So expectedly, for some of us, we knew that if that matter had been canvassed on its merit, the judge would have also refused it. But in this case, there seemed to be a mutual understanding between the two counsels. A very interesting dimension, because the court also ruled striking it. So what will be the fate when they go approach the Court of Appeal? The Court of Appeal will have to, first of all, they look at the application for a stay of execution. And again, this is very interesting, because these are interesting times in Nigerian judiciary. It is not going to be automatically expected that the Court of Appeal will grant a stay of execution unless there are special circumstances, because the general rule is that the person who obtains judgment in his favor must immediately begin to enjoy the fruits of judgment. But consider the circumstances that you have to swear in a governor, and then if what happens to the outcome of the appeal, you know, look at all the paraphernalia that go with swearing.
So what he did was right. It's not that he can go to another federal high court judge.
No.
To seek to institute that stay of execution.
No, certainly not.
It can only happen in the Court of Appeal.
They can only go to the Court of Appeal.
So let's just hope that's what he will do. And I'll come to you, Professor Adeniyi. What do you make of the political intrigues that's ongoing? I mean, since this happened, just today, now we also learned that some lawmakers in Cross River who defected to the APC alongside the governor have been asked to vacate their positions. I mean, is this a very strong lesson to the political class as to be circumspect before taking such defection decisions?
Well, first of all, my first worry is the endless resort, to the judiciary, the increasing involvement of the judiciary in our political process, rightly or wrongly. First, in the wake of every election, you will resort to what Falana once called the tribunalization of the electionary process. People go to court endlessly. Massively now. There's a timeline for the resolution of all these disputes. But the one that is becoming included now, integrated into the process, is resort to court while elected officials are supposed to focus on statecraft. So you see a lot of distraction. Ordinarily, they are unable to concentrate on the business of governance. And who suffers at the end of the day? Growth and development suffers, and it translates into increasing the suffering or continuous suffering for the people, because the yearnings and aspirations of the people are never met because of the contest for power, rightly or wrongly. And mark my word. But again, back to a question of moving from jumping ship. I think it has to be, it's an attitudinal thing. We have made the point severally that our democracy is still growing. People who are less ideological than they're supposed to be, so they are propelled most of the time, influenced by factors other than ideology, other than conviction, other than some deep-seated persuasions around high values, high virtues, high cardinal objectives. Most of the time they are swayed by little things, fickle-minded around material things. That's why they jump ship so easily. But I'm very confident. I want to see it as a development, as a crisis of the development of our democracy, and it should even out, maybe in the course of time.
Okay. Now, how swift do you think that the Court of Appeal will attend to this issue, considering the nature of things, that even the next elections are coming forward pretty soon? And if the Court of Appeal gives a verdict very quickly, the way a lot of people anticipate, this may actually end up in the Supreme Court. Do you think the judiciary can quickly dispose of this matter right on time before the next election?
Oh yes, because if you look at what transpired at the Court of Appeal, where two counsels have decided to mutually agree, it shows that there's a strong possibility that there will be abridgment of time and accelerated hearing at the Court of Appeal, and the same thing will apply to the Supreme Court. But we haven't heard the last of it yet until the Court of Appeal. The most important thing in the mind of Umahi now is the application for stay of execution, whether the Court of Appeal will grant it. It's very possible that the Court of Appeal may not grant it, because it doesn't matter how sound your argument is as a lawyer approaching the Court of Appeal. You must show that exceptional and special circumstances to, that will convince the panel of the Court of Appeal judges why a stay of execution should be granted. Because if we continue to make nonsense of court judgments from the Federal High Court, the courts of first instance, then we might as well just be headed for this unending crisis at the Supreme Court, where it has cases up to where it doesn't even have dates for up to 2026. You know, so the ridiculous and mind-boggling congestion of cases at the Supreme Court. So it baffles us that the Supreme Court and the appellate courts in general, that's Court of Appeal and Supreme Court, pay more attention to political cases as if politics is more important. So it's important that the jurisdiction of courts over political matters be reduced as much as possible. And unfortunately, the Electoral Act didn't address that. And it used to be a problem of money in politics, but now it's a bigger problem, having judges deciding who gets elected, to the extent that the very insidious term procurement in quote as now.
I mean, it's actually a warning that even former President Goodluck Jonathan had given, saying that the courts should play lesser roles in telling people.
Yes, but when you use the word procurement, it means that orders and judgments are now being purchased. I can't. It's so immoral to consider as a lawyer that that is what the word that is being used, even by lawyers, procurement of judgment because of political cases. This is really terrible. Okay,
very interesting indeed. We just have to move on to other stories now. Well, as a Federal High Court nullified the controversial Section 84, subsection 12 of the Electoral Act 2022, barring political appointees from contesting elections, the Attorney General of the Federation and Minister of Justice Abubakar Malami, in a statement, said the federal government will immediately give effect to the judgment by gazetting it, showing support for the motion. Now, according to Malami, the judgment of the court will be recognized by the government printers in printing the Electoral Act 2022. And there's been this massive division among lawyers across the land, senior advocates of Nigeria, all divided. And I'll throw it back to you, Tietie. What exactly is the problem? Because there's a huge division as to why this case will end up in court without a representation by the National Assembly, and then even the person that took the case to court, we don't know his local standing. Is he a political appointee and all of that? And the swift response of the government to want to implement this, even when there's a process of appeal that may happen.
The circumstances are quite mischievous. Based on the Supreme Court Additional Jurisdiction Act of 2002, the government would have simply taking the National Assembly straight to the Supreme Court for this matter to be decided, if government officials like the chief law officer of the country is that interested. So it sounds like a very huge joke, to the extent that an order that it's very, very unlikely, that is unprecedented, asking the Attorney General of the Federation to delete a particular section of the law. The Attorney General of the Federation doesn't have such powers.
Yeah, in fact, even the precedence is what we don't know if it
has never happened. It's highly unprecedented. And then I think it's just making our democratic democratic standards very cheap, and it will not stand the test of time in any way, but it will serve the mischievous purpose of just delaying, getting time, using it to buy time and all that, which is the nuisance value of many litigations that have been instituted on this political dispensation. So it will indeed serve the value of buying time for some of these political office holders, making reference to that Federal High Court order. But predictably, the Supreme Court will be livid when this matter gets to it.
And Adeniyi, if this scenario continues the way it's going, isn't it going to affect the political parties? Because if you give your ticket to someone who's a serving minister or commissioner or special advisor, and this case continues, it's been appealed, and all of a sudden the Supreme Court rules against it,
eventually,
isn't it going to affect the party, and we'll have another Zamfara scenario?
Of course, the political elite, the power elites are worried. That's why we're having this level of subterfuge, what looks like we are doing an attempt to circumvent this process. And of course, I read interesting debates around it so far. There's a brilliant article written by Professor Kingsley Odinkalo, and he made comparison around situations where we've had cases lasting 30-something years, 40-something years, and of course we're having political cases being dealt with from the beginning to the end over days, Well, it's okay. I want to be positive about it by hoping that, the way some of these political cases are being handled, that some of the cases that are not necessarily political can also, the speed at which the judiciary is applying to the political cases, that it can also be replicated in the cases that are not political, so that justice can be seen, it can be served much more than we are presently experiencing. But for the political class, I think they are rightly worried, and that's why they are looking for ways to circumvent it. But how this plays out, we only still lies in the womb of time. Anyway.
Well, a lot of peddling of influence there, and there's a lot of accusations against the Attorney General of the Federation, Abubakar Malami, that is putting his own interests ahead of national interest. But in all of this now, what would you advise those who are still serving in government to do? Because the Constitution actually says you should resign 30 days before the next election, but the Constitution did not say whether it was going to be a primary election or the substantive election. But the argument by some senior lawyers are saying that the primary is actually an election in itself. So the right thinking is that Section 84 subsection 12 give more strength to that constitutional provision.
Well, considering the provision of Article 2 of the exclusive legislative list, which empowers the National Assembly to make, specifically empowers the National Assembly to make laws regulating elections. So the national laws made by the National Assembly with regards to elections are final. And there is no point, it is not possible to stifle the powers of the National Assembly to make law for the good governance and order of Nigeria. So this is just mischief going on here. And it's as a result of shortage of patriotism on the part of those who run our polity, I mean politicians especially, who don't have, who have the sense of preservation for the system. So what's the idea? It's a game. The politics is a game. So the game approach is that let's play by the rules. So, but what we are engaged in mostly is to circumvent the rules to suit very parochial interest, and it will always lead to catastrophic consequences. Yeah. We've seen it in this country.
But I wanted you to actually address that. When the Constitution says you should resign 30 days before the next election, what election was it talking about?
It was the primary election
or the substantive
specific general election, whether it's for the National Assembly, State Houses of Assembly, or that's for the president, governorship, and the rest. It wasn't referring to primaries with regards to conduct of either congresses or conventions. So the National Assembly does have power to make a law specifically regulating the conduct of congresses or conventions or other forms of associations in the political party. So the distinction is clear.
So clear.
30 days with respect to the election, which is the substantive law. However, don't forget that there is always a reason for laws being made. The goal of the mischief rule is this: there is a mischief to be cured by every law. So when you think about the abuse of political office, the abuse of incumbential powers by political office holders, it is understandable that you cannot use resources of an office to fight an election against innocent persons who got money contributed from them by ordinary persons. You can't do that. So the National Assembly has a reason to tie for that particular legislation, and that legislation should hold. There is no point trying to scuttle the system with that kind of
and that's the fear that people actually have, Prof, that these ministers, special advisors and all of that, if they go into party primaries with all these institutions of state, that they will have a better advantage than those who are just coming in. Shouldn't these people be patriotic enough to just step down, since there's a substantive law on ground?
That's always very difficult. Patriotism can hardly be expressed in that light. But of course, the predators of the law, they do what they were doing. Because we're talking about the youth budge, we're talking about the need to encourage the youths. Many of them are of course very, very ambitious. You need to create a level playing ground. I think those were the thoughts that came into the minds of the framers of the law, leading to its enactment. But now we are seeing a reaction, but how do we deal with that reaction? I think it might need some level of understanding, some level of maybe more building of consensus, so that people can be on the same page. But this may not happen again, only through moral suasion. That will always be very difficult. It's always very difficult for people to voluntarily waive their rights, to voluntarily waive privileges, but of course the onus is always on the system to make sure that, where your right or privilege stop should be where that of the other person begins, and that's what the system is trying to do now.
Okay, so very quickly, as we try to round off the conversation, what will you say to those state governments that have already issued, statements and policies asking political office holders to resign, and some people had already resigned before this appeal and all of that? What will you say to those people?
Quite encouraging. It only makes sense. I see that happening. But the prevailing thought is that they need to be asked to resign before doing that, before doing such, the democratic culture, it shows that it has not been actually, developed among us, and that is a failure of those we borrowed democracy from. We don't hear much coming from the international democratic institutions and countries, trying to build that culture among us. That look, it is live and let's live. It's give and take, and it's not do or die kind of politics that we unfortunately, because many of our people think of politics as a form of employment, as a form of just reaching out to state power, state resources in order to help themselves and help their cronies. Unfortunately, things really need to change. But again, like Prof was trying to say, I think there should be some measure of compulsion as against the moral suasion. So we want to see, strict compliance to the laws that have been made. And this idea of the Attorney General trying to delete that portion, I mean, it's unthinkable. Leave it there until there's a final pronouncement on the law. You don't, go and gazette, a law that is not, I mean.
Yeah, so you're cherry picking, actually. Yes, that's what some people are saying. And when you cherry pick, what happens to the other aspects of the law?
Again, we are not saying that vociferous response from the National Assembly. One would have expected that the National Assembly should have been very, very, reactionary to this extent of, causing some national opera. But the National Assembly, again, is falling to that docile level of...
Yeah, well, we have heard that they are going to appeal, but they were not joined as parties in the initial suit. So can they join? Can they appeal it?
The National Assembly should be assertive enough. Of course, yes, the National Assembly should take the government to court upon that. It is not a matter of hearsay anymore. There is a judgment to that effect. So they should approach the Supreme Court, that is by passing the Federal High Court and Court of Appeal straight to the Supreme Court to assert its distinctive powers to make laws for the good governance and order of Nigeria. And it should, when it does that, then the Attorney General will be seen to have, carried out the foul power by approaching the lower court to determine the powers of the National Assembly. That's unthinkable.
Very interesting submission indeed. It should also go straight to the Supreme Court. Frank Tietie is a lawyer and a Rise News analyst. We must thank you for joining us on the show. Same as Professor Abiodun Adeniyi, who's a Rise News analyst. You've been here with us since, and we must thank you for being on the show. Well, that's how it's been for this edition of the Arise interview. Do join us again tomorrow. From me and the entire team here in Abuja. Goodbye and thank you for watching. I'm Somna Sambo.